The Spanish Blue Division is one of World War II's most unknown elite fighting forces. To this day it is seen as infamous and given little respect by many who don't understand the story. Hopefully in this video I'll be able to show you the entire tale of the Blue Division, from their formation through to their actions during the Second World War. So please enter with an open mind to one of the most elite combat units in history. To truly understand the roots of the Blue Division, we must go all the way back to the Spanish Civil War. This began on July 17, 1936 and continued until March 28, 1939. The two factions involved were the Republicans, who were a left-wing conglomerate of anarchists, socialists, communists and liberal democrats, against the Nationalists, who were a right-wing group comprised of military leaders, conservative monarchists and fascists. This civil war was brutal, pitching neighbour against neighbour, fighting each other depending on which side their ideologies fell, and with international support providing equipment, weapons and manpower, the civil war quickly escalated, with battles from the mountains to the tight streets of Madrid. The Republicans had the support mainly from the Soviet Union, and the Nationalists got support from fascist Germany and Italy. This would be a main influence on the founding of the Blue Division, as Spain, which remained neutral during World War II, needed to show some modicum of support to Germany in its war, and many Spanish people still wanted revenge on the Soviet Union for supporting their enemies and for trying to spread communism throughout Europe. With the Nationalist victory in 1939, many well-trained and combat veterans who truly believed in the governance of fascism went back to their lives, but in their minds they were waiting for a chance to return the favour to the Soviet Union after their interference in the Civil War. That day would soon come, as on the 1st of September 1939, Germany launched its invasion of Poland, and the Second World War had officially begun. Spain was in a tough position, with it having pressure from its fascist allies to join the war and provide support, and counter-pressure from the Allied forces, who threatened to isolate Spain from trade and potentially even attack if it sided with the Axis. Franco, the leader of Spain, had to play his hand well. His main goal was to rebuild a ruined Spain, and for this he needed trade, but also didn't have the resources and infrastructure to truly support a war effort. So he came to a rather devious tactic of changing Spain's official neutral position to one of non-belligerence on the 12th of June 1940. This literally means a lack of desire to argue or fight, but allows a nation to provide aid and support to participating factions, as long as it is not directly involved. It normally allows said nation to avoid much of the backlash from a conflict, but to participate in a limited fashion. So with the invasion of Russia with Operation Barbarossa on June 22, 1941, Spain's leadership knew its people would want to fight against the Soviets, but it had to be careful about how it would lend this support. This will to send support was then exacerbated further by the words of the Secretary of the Foreign Office, Ramon Sereno Sua, on the 24th of June, these being, "Comrades, it is not an hour of speeches, but the Phalange dictates in these moments its judgment of conviction. Russia is guilty. Guilty of our civil war, guilty of our death, of our founder, Jose Antonio, and of the death of so many comrades, of so many fallen soldiers due to the aggression of Russian communists. The extermination of Russia is a demand of the history and of the future of Europe." Strong words, as you can see, and really shows how the Spanish felt towards communist Russia. It was now inevitable that Spain must answer the call from its supporters in the Civil War. It had to repay the favours to Germany and some revenge to Russia. And on June 27, 1941, recruitment officers all over Spain opened up to a voluntary enlistment in a foreign expeditionary force, and the support was overwhelming. The original number aimed for was 18,946 men, but this was far surpassed, and the recruitment officers closed on July 6th, 6 days before the enlistment deadline. This was because the number of volunteers far exceeded what was required. This was the official start of the Spanish Blue Division, and what a journey was about to be embarked upon. The Blue Division had the men, and now it was time to be formed into a cohesive combat unit. First, the leadership of the Blue Division was fiercely contested between the Army's choice and the Spanish fascist party, the Phalange. In the end, Franco's choice, General Agustin Mojas Grandes, was selected to command these men. He had previous combat and command experience, and was well liked enough by both sides not to cause any major political issues. The original plan was to form 5 regiments, 4 of infantry and 1 of artillery. The regiments were to be named after their first commanders: Regiments Rodrigo, Pimentel, Esperanza and Vienna. But this was to be changed almost immediately, as when the Spanish met the Germans to talk about how the Blue Division would actually serve with the Axis forces, The Germans had their own ideas on how it would work. First, the Blue Division should be organised according to German patterns, 3 regiments of infantry instead of 4. Spain should provide the necessary equipment for communications, 300 trucks and 400 motorcycles. And finally, it was agreed that the personal surplus could be formed from a reserve. This was because Spain could not actually provide the communications equipment, trucks and motorcycles previously mentioned. They would be provided by Germany, which was a smart choice as Spain's infrastructure was a mess after the Civil War. It was a decent compromise to have Spain's men with German equipment, and to be honest, Germany was now producing far better small arms and infantry equipment than Spain. This also leads to an interesting uniform situation, as the Blue Division could not use official Spanish army uniforms. They adopted a symbolic uniform, comprising the red berets of the Carlists, the khaki trousers of the Spanish Legion, and the blue shirts of the Phalangist movement, hence the name Blue Division. This uniform was only used while on leave in Spain, and in the field, the soldiers wore the German army field grey uniforms, with a shield on the upper right sleeve bearing the word España, and using the national colours of Spain. With these negotiations finished on the 7th of July, the Blue Division began their journey to the barracks and training ground at Grafenwehr, Germany, and they arrived there on the 23rd of July. The training grounds were large, around 200 square kilometres, with 25 small compounds able to house a complete expeditionary unit of up to 50,000 men. The Germans were making sure their foreign friends had the necessary support to get into shape. The training for the Blue Division was decided as 3 months by the Germans, but General Grandes said that he would only need a month, as 80% of the volunteers had combat experience from the Civil War, and the other fifth, who were mainly young university students, were fit and eager to learn, so together their shared experience and will to fight, in his opinion, would make up for less training time. And he was right, and on July 25th, General Grandes signed Operations Order No. 1, which outlined the new organisational structure of the Blue Division. They were designated the 250th Infantry Division in the German Army, and it included the following units: Staff and Headquarters, Military Police, Motorised Platoon and Service Units, Weapons and Logistics Command. 3 infantry regiments: the 262nd Regiment under Colonel Pimentel, the 263rd Regiment under Colonel Werner, the 269th Regiment under Colonel Martinez Esparza, the 250th Artillery Regiment, the 250th Signal Group, the 250th Reserve Battalion, the Armed Bernards, the 250th Reconnaissance Group, and the 250th Transport Group. It also had administrative, medical, audit, veterinary, and pharmacy services. But, much to the disappointment of the Spanish forces, the Germans decided not to motorise the Blue Division. Instead, they supplied 5,610 horses for transportation, most likely as Germany lacked the ability to motorise all of its own homegrown divisions, so the Spanish had to make do with, in my opinion, the best transport in all human history, the mighty horse. And obviously Genghis Khan would agree with me there. Horses, though, did have their disadvantages against trucks in some areas, but they also had some advantages when it came to different types of terrain, so, better than nothing, to be fair. And true to General Grandes' words, the Blue Division was ready to be deployed after less than a month of training, and by August 20th, the Blue Division was heading by rail towards the Eastern Front to give the Soviets a bit of payback for their involvement in the Civil War. The Blue Division's destination was Army Group Center, with their primary target being Moscow. But on their way there on the 27th of August, they disembarked in the Polish town of Grodno, about 1,000 kilometres from the front. They were surprised to learn they had to walk the rest of the way on foot. Yes, they would have to walk around 620 miles to the front to then fight the Red Army. Not an ideal start to their deployment, but the Spanish took it in their stride, quite literally. On their way to the front, a few issues developed with the German forces. As the Blue Division was less formal, its men tended to walk out of formation, their dress was more casual, a lot more relaxed, it fitted with the Spanish look on life, and far different to the more uptight Germans who didn't like it. They also took offence to the fact that Spanish soldiers took great interest in the local population, making conversation, trading supplies, and they spent a fair bit of time flirting with the paninka, Russian name for woman. This is pretty normal for soldiers in my opinion, and the locals spoke highly of the Blue Division, saying they were kind, a little bit cheeky, but all round good men with a respectful way about them. But as the Germans viewed the Slavs as a lesser people and not worthy of their attention, they didn't like that the Spanish gave attention to these people. But the Spanish, being as they are, carried on, intent to have a bit of fun and joy on the way to the front, and personally I don't blame them. If the Germans were too uptight and miserable, they were more than welcome to be. Unfortunately, these complaints did reach higher up the chain, and words were had, but as operations were not going as well as hoped, these minor complaints never came to any major disciplinary action. As they continued to the front, the Blue Division received new orders on the 25th of September, with Hitler now prioritising the north and south pushes into Russia, as Moscow's defences, the so-called Ring of Steel, was holding well, and new strategies were needed to break the Soviets. So the order to reassign the Blue Division to the north, under the command of Field Marshal Ritter von Leeb, arrived. The Blue Division had expected to be with the units that conquered Moscow, as they really wanted to be there to topple the capital of global communism, but it wasn't meant to be, and the Blue Division were assigned to the 1st Army Corps of the 16th Army. The Blue Division took up positions at the front, relieving two battered German divisions that had suffered heavy losses against the Russians. The sector assigned to the Blue Division stretched 40 kilometres north from the shores of Lake Ilmen to the villages of Krasny Bor. General Grandes quickly recognised that this line was too long to defend adequately, and a deep defensive setup was impossible, as the division was also tasked with offensive operations. To manage the situation, he divided the front into 3 sectors, assigning one to each regiment. The northern sector would go to the 269th Regiment, and this was from Krasny Bor to Ugloki. The central sector was 263rd Regiment, and they would defend from Ugloki to the highway junction at Grigorov and Leningrad, and the southern sector with the 262nd Regiment from the highway junction to the shores of Lake Ilmen. Apologies for any poor pronunciation, it is what it is. And the Blue Division's command post was established in the Kremlin of Novgorod, which became the hub for much of the division's logistic support. Most of the supply and administrative services were concentrated in Novgorod to sustain operations along the extended front. On October 13th, the Germans decided to resume their offensive operations to encircle Leningrad. The 16th Army was tasked with seizing the strategic railway hub of Tikhvin and later linking up with Finnish forces at a nearby river. The plan called for the 126th Division of the 16th Army, positioned north of the Blue Division, to cross the Volkhov River at Kozino. Once it established a beachhead, the division would pivot south along the eastern bank to support the Blue Division's crossing near Novgorod. On October 14th, General Grandes ordered Colonel Esperanza, commander of the 269th Regiment, to carry out a series of reconnaissance missions on the eastern bank of the Volkhov. The goal was to secure a beachhead for the division. The attack was designed as a diversion to draw Russian attention and conceal the real operations, which were planned to take place north of the Blue Division's sector. On October 20th, an attack was carried out on the eastern bank, and the 2nd Battalion of the 269th Regiment established a position near Udarnik. The same day, the 2nd Battalion met the Germans in Secherlevov, and they went south to expand their position and capture Smysko. They seized this from the Russians, and then on October 22nd, the 2nd Battalion was then ordered to continue the advance to the south, and the same day, after bloody combat, the village of Sitno was captured. The 3rd Battalion of the 263rd Regiment and the Art Bernarda Reserve Unit followed the 2nd Battalion across the Volkhov River and took up positions south of Sitno. On October 28th, the 3rd Battalion captured the village of Togoda, while the Art Bernarda secured the village of Dobroka, and the next day took control of Nitlekino. With these actions, the Spanish offensive on the eastern bank of the Volkhov came to an end, and by the conclusion of the operation, the Spanish forces on the eastern bank numbered around 4,000 men. And once again, yeah, I know my pronunciation is appalling. Please do not tell me in the comments. It's about as good as it's going to get. In the early hours of December 27th at 3 in the morning, the 1002nd and 1004th Russian regiments launched a fierce assault on the Spanish position at Lubkova and Erdenik. However, they encountered an unexpected strongpoint defended by the 2nd Lieutenant Rubio, a position that would become known as the Intermediate. Recognizing the strategic importance of this position and the intensity of the Russian attack, General Grandes issued a clear order: resist as if you were nailed to the ground, do not retreat. Despite overwhelming odds, the Intermediate eventually fell to the Russians. However, later the same day, Spanish forces counterattacked and recaptured the position. The scene they found was horrific. Shock and outrage filled the faces of the Spanish soldiers as they surveyed the aftermath. 2nd Lieutenant Rubio and his men had been brutally executed, left half naked, their bodies pinned to the ground with picks and rifle bayonets. True to the general's command, they had died defending the position, quite literally nailed to the ground. But this scene would also fuel the rage of the Spanish Blue Division and make them fight even harder. Starting in December 1941, reports about the Blue Division's situation began to seriously concern Franco. The division had left Spain with high hopes of victory, but the war was turning into a prolonged conflict with an uncertain outcome. Intelligence reports from the Spanish General Staff highlighted the steadily worsening tactical situation for the Spanish forces. Franco grew increasingly troubled by the rising casualty losses that were especially significant for the regiment. Many of the fallen were junior and senior leaders of the Phalange, the political party that now formed the ideological backbone of the government. The Blue Division had become a prominent element of the Spanish internal politics. Its popularity and heroic reputation made it a powerful symbol and a tempting tool for political manipulation. However, the prolonged absence of so many of the Phalangist leaders serving in the division was already weakening the party's influence. In January 1942, Franco made a critical decision. He instructed the Spanish ambassador in Berlin to request the temporary withdrawal of the division from the front so it could be re-equipped with its men and have them relieved for a short break. The Germans, however, refused the request, citing severe weather conditions as the reason for their refusal. Although Germany did not relent on the subject of the division's repatriation, General Cabanellas received the authorization to send 400 men every 10 days to cover the casualties and to replace certain important Phalange leaders. The recruitment officers were opened once again, but without the great publicity of the initial recruitment, Franco did not want to appear hostile to the Allies. On this occasion, the army replaced the Phalangist leaders of the organisation with new recruits. The responsibility for recruiting fell upon General Esteban Infantes, who would later become the new commander of the Blue Division. With the start of Hispanic-German negotiations to relieve the Blue Division, one of the darkest chapters of Spain's involvement in Russia began. Given the prominence and reputation the Blue Division had earned, and the growing popularity of its commander, General Grandes, it was no surprise that various groups sought to win him over to their causes. Monarchists, Phalangalists, and the Spanish military, and even the German Secret Service and Hitler himself all attempted to sway him. These factions were disillusioned with Franco and began secretly searching for an alternative leader. Between May and the end of 1942, several conspiracies aimed at overthrowing Franco took shape. Monarchists, radical elements of the Phalange, and even the German Secret Service were involved. Franco became increasingly concerned as General Grandes' popularity continued to rise. It was a double-edged sword, potentially beneficial to Franco but also a threat. Determined to neutralise any political challenge, Franco insisted that Grandes be recalled to Spain. His replacement in the Blue Division was General Esteban Infantes. Although some historians speculate that Grandes promised Hitler that Spain would officially join the war during their meetings on July 12, 1942, his loyalty to Franco makes that theory unlikely. Ultimately, Hitler realised that he could neither replace Franco nor turn Grandes into a puppet for his own ambitions. And in early December 1942, General Grandes was officially relieved of his command. Before his departure, Hitler awarded him the Oak Leaves to the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, an honour that only one foreign general had ever received. And on December 17th, Grandes returned to Spain, where he was greeted by an affectionate crowd in Madrid. Franco promoted him to Lieutenant General and awarded him the Silver Palm, the highest distinction of the Phalange. In 1943, General Muñoz Grandes would be appointed chief of Franco's military house and become one of his closest advisors for years to come. The summer of 1942 brought significant success for the German offensive. The Wehrmacht captured Crimea, and the advance of the Sixth Army towards Stalingrad seemed unstoppable. On July 23rd, Hitler ordered a final push to capture Leningrad. Army Group North was tasked with taking the city by early September in an operation codenamed Northern Light. The Volkhov sector remained calm, but Hitler aimed to involve the Blue Division in a decisive victory. He believed that the division's success would boost Spanish popular support and potentially pressure Franco into formally committing to the Axis cause. Moreover, General Grandes had already requested that the Blue Division be moved to a more active front before his departure. General George Liндman, commander of the 18th Army, strongly opposed transferring the Blue Division. Militarily, it was an exceptional unit, fully combat ready after completing troop rotations. While Hitler had ordered other divisions to reduce their battalions and reorganise, the Blue Division was exempt from this restructuring, making it one of the most powerful units at the front. By August 19th, General Infantes received orders to hand over the Volkhov sector to the 20th Motorised Division. The Blue Division assembled in Wurza, where it was re-equipped and regrouped. And by the 31st of August, the Blue Division was officially transferred. It was assigned a key sector within the siege ring around Leningrad, relieving the 121st German Division. The new position formed a salient in front of Kolpina, a suburb of Leningrad, placing the Blue Division in the central sector of the planned attack. As Operation Northern Light neared its final preparations, the Soviets launched a new offensive. The Soviet High Command hoped that an attack on the northern front near Leningrad would divert German forces from the southern front at Stalingrad. By August 27th, the Red Army had recovered from the heavy losses of the spring, and the 11th Army was fully re-equipped. The Soviet plan involved a pincer movement. The 11th Army would attack from the south of Lake Ladoga towards Schlussburg, while the 55th Army would advance to meet them. This offensive marked the start of the First Battle of Ladoga. During the battle, the Blue Division played a key role in halting a Soviet breakthrough that threatened the rear of the 121st German Infantry Division. Despite repeat Russian attacks, by September 21st, the pressure began to ease across the entire sector. Although the Soviet forces failed to achieve their primary objective, they unintentionally succeeded in disrupting Operation Northern Light, which was ultimately cancelled. Undeterred by their earlier failure, the Soviets launched a second assault during the winter. This time the operation was more ambitious. Operation Iscra, aka Spark, began on January 12, 1943. The 2nd Shock Army attacked from the east, while the 67th Army advanced from Leningrad along the southern shore of Lake Ladoga, aiming to link up and break the German siege. A narrow corridor, held by elements of the German Army Corps, was all that separated the two armies. The Second Battle of Ladoga was far more intense. Soviet forces overwhelmed the corridor's defenders, forcing neighbouring German units to send reinforcements. The Blue Division dispatched one of its elite units, the 2nd Battalion of the 269th Regiment, to assist. And on January 16, 1943, about 500 Spanish soldiers were sent to reinforce the collapsing front. By then, the 2nd Shock Army and 67th Army had already linked up. On January 22nd, in a desperate attempt to halt the Soviet advance, the Spanish battalion entered combat near Miga Poslok. The conditions were brutal. Temperatures dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius, the forests were dense and nearly impenetrable, and the disorganised German lines made it difficult for the Spaniards to secure their flanks. The battalion deployed in an exposed area with no natural cover. Only fire breaks offered minimal protection. Facing overwhelming odds, they found themselves against two Soviet divisions, the 11th and 71st, which vastly outnumbered them. By the end of the first day of Operation Iscra, the Spanish had suffered 20% of their troops' total casualties, but refused to retreat. When the battalion was finally relieved on January 30th, only 28 survivors remained of the original 500 men. Despite the high cost, their stubborn defence helped prevent a complete Soviet breakthrough, and the siege of Leningrad continued. After the battle, the front was reorganised. The Blue Division was transferred to the 1st Army Corps under General Philip Kleffel. The division's new sector included Krasny Bor and the October Railway, a strategically critical position in the ongoing defence of Leningrad. February 1943 began on the Eastern Front with the biggest defeat suffered by Hitler's armies to that date. On the 2nd of February, the 6th Army of Van Paulus surrendered to General Vasily Chukov after having fought hopelessly in the ruins of Stalingrad. Amid this victorious atmosphere, the Russian command decided to break definitively the siege of Leningrad by widening the corridor that connected the area of the Volkhov with the besieged city. They decided to conduct two convergent attacks that would leave the Kolpina to the south and from Pogist to the west. In February, the Blue Division only had 16,863 men to cover a front of 30 kilometres. Seeing that the entire division was on the front lines and practically without reserves, General Infantes ordered the 269th Regiment, if not attacked, to be ready to provide units to support. The 263rd Regiment received orders to form two companies of riflemen and another of machine guns, based on its reserves and the auxiliary men. The general was even more willing to appeal to the forces that were in the Villa Relief. They were ready to return to Spain. The forces deployed by the Blue Division in the area were the 262nd Regiment, the Aunt Bernarda, the Skiers Company, a group of anti-tank guns, the Exploration Group, a battalion of sappers, and one artillery group of 105mm guns, reinforced with 2 batteries. The Germans promised to support the Spanish forces by sending an anti-tank company of 75mm and another battery of 14 88mm guns and a regiment of artillery. However, this support never arrived. The positions assigned to the 262nd Regiment had a front of about 18 kilometres, which was covered in the following way. 2.5 kilometres covered by the 3rd Battalion, the Art Bernarda, covered up to 2 kilometres along the main route, and the 2nd Battalion covered 6 kilometres, and the rest was covered by the 1st Battalion. These positions were in the way of a steamroller known as the 5th Russian Army, comprised of the 45th and 63rd Divisions of the Red Guards, the 43rd and 72nd Infantry Divisions, 2 brigades of skiers, 1 motorised brigade, 2 tank battalions, which was between 80 and 100 T-34s and KB-1 tanks, 2 anti-tank regiments between 150 and 200 batteries of artillery, around 800 guns that is, and an imprecise number of rocket launchers, the Stalin pipe organs. These provided the Russians with the following superiority ratios of around 20 to 1 in infantry and 15 to 1 in artillery, tanks and aviation. At 06:45 hours on the February the 10th, the Soviet offensive on Spanish positions began with a devastating artillery barrage. Soon 43,000 Soviet shock troops would descend upon 5,000 Spanish troops in the area. Nearly 800 guns relentlessly shelled the Blue Division's first and second lines, hitting observation posts, command centres and artillery positions. For nearly 2 hours, the Spanish forces endured what they described as the end of the world. Just 30 minutes into the bombardment, the situation worsened when 30 bombers and 20 fighters unleashed an aerial assault that shattered the first line's defences. The attack was spearheaded by 3 Soviet infantry divisions and 1 tank division, all focused on breaking through the front held by the 262nd Regiment. By 1100 hours, the situation had become critical. The first Spanish lines had completely been destroyed, yet miraculously, the second line still held. Small groups of determined Spanish fighters fought desperately to slow the Soviet advance. Despite their efforts, the Soviet infantry attacked from multiple directions, wiping out the 1st, 2nd, 6th and 7th companies of the 1st Battalion of the 262nd Regiment. Along with the 2nd Company, the Aunt Bernarda, the remains of these units were surrounded as early as around noon. In total, nearly 2 battalions had already been lost. Desperate for reinforcements, a request for help was sent to Villa Relief, where 100 soldiers along with all the officers waiting to return to Spain volunteered to defend Krasny Bor. General Philip Kleffel, commander of the 1st Army Corps, quickly grasped the seriousness of the situation. Fearing the collapse of this sector, he began assembling every available unit behind the Blur Division's positions. However, he needed at least 1 day to organise the defence. Until then, the Spanish would have to hold the line alone. At 3:15, the German Luftwaffe finally arrived to support the battered Spaniards. Unfortunately, the air support came too late. The most dangerous threat by then was a Soviet breakthrough near the Iscra river bend, where 2nd Battalion of the 269th Regiment had been ordered to stop the enemy advance at all costs. And by the rest of the afternoon, the Soviet momentum began to wane. Soviet infantry, now more interested in looting the Spanish positions, failed to capitalise on their initial success. Instead of pushing deeper into the Spanish defences, they paused to eliminate the remaining pockets of resistance, a costly mistake that drained their time, resources and momentum. The Blue Division, with their determined resistance, had managed to turn the tide, yet the cost was immense. By the 11th of February, after repelling yet another Soviet attack, the surviving Spanish were ordered to withdraw from Krasny Bor. The 212th German Division, led by General Helmuth Rehmann, assumed responsibility for defending the sector beyond the Iscra River. The battle for Krasny Bor left a lasting mark on the Blue Division. Out of the 5,600 men engaged in the battle, 3,645 were killed, wounded or captured. Among them, over 300 Spanish soldiers were still missing in action to this day. After the bloody Battle of Krasny Bor, the Russian army seemed to lose momentum, returning to a war of attrition. However, on March 19th, the Soviets launched large-scale offensives in an attempt to achieve what they failed to accomplish, on the 10th of February. The artillery of the 55th Russian Army began an intense barrage on Spanish positions along the Iscra River, while the 72nd Infantry Division attempted to breach the front. Once again, the Spanish forces repelled this attack. Throughout the harsh winter of 1942 to 1943, successive Soviet assaults across the Eastern Front failed to achieve their ultimate strategic goals. Though they secured some tactical gains in the north, despite continuous German shelling of Leningrad, the siege had weakened and in some areas had been broken through, but not in the Spanish sector. In the south, the Donetsk Basin, which was under threat, but Marshal Kleist managed to avoid the encirclement of his forces. Meanwhile, in the centre, Soviet forces penetrated the German lines west of Moscow. The situation was deteriorating for Germany, not only on the Eastern Front, but also in other theatres of war. In North Africa, the formidable Afrika Korps began to falter, and German cities were increasingly subjected to devastating Allied bombings. These events were closely monitored in Madrid, where Franco found himself under significant pressure from the Allies to recall the Blue Division. For Franco, it was a difficult decision. Repatriating the division posed several risks. It could appear that he was abandoning Germany as their fortunes turned. He risked a possible German military response. If the division remained at the front, Spain could face Allied military intervention as the Allied forces were already positioned to the east and south of the country. With the German victory on the Eastern Front now seeming impossible, the entire division was at risk of annihilation. Although the Blue Division still enjoyed public support in Spain, the fervour that surrounded its formation had faded. Additionally, Franco recognised that a military defeat could severely damage his regime's credibility. So on September 25th, after carefully weighing the situation, Franco decided to order the division's repatriation. However, he allowed those who wished to continue fighting to remain with the Germans. This decision was not made public until October 1st, when an official request for the division's withdrawal was submitted to Hitler, and on October 12th, the Blue Division was relieved by the German 215th Division. General Emilio Esteban Infantes was surprised to receive the repatriation order. Still, the Spanish government accepted the German proposal to maintain a smaller volunteer unit at the front for ideological reasons. Thus, the Spanish Legion of Volunteers was formed on November 17, 1943. Known as the Blue Spanish Field Legion to the Germans, I couldn't say that very well, apologies, the Spanish Legion to the Soviets, the new unit consisted of 2,134 men under the command of Colonel Antonio Garcia Navarro. The Blue Legion engaged in several key operations after this still. On December 1st, 1943, the Blue Division helped with anti-guerrilla campaign to clear partisans from the Oranienbaum pocket. On January 19, 1944, protection of the retreating German 121st Division as it withdrew to the Panther Line along the eastern bank of the Peipus River between Peskov and Narva. Defence of Lublin, where the Legion distinguished itself in combat. And by the end of March 1944, the Blue Legion was ordered to return to Spain. The last units arrived home on April 17, 1944, bringing to a close the final chapter of Spain's military involvement in World War II, a remarkable and symbolic achievement to Spain's long history of military achievements, all the way dating back really to the battles over the Iberian Peninsula. So I hope you enjoyed this video. It's been a long one, I know, but I did do something on the Spanish Legion about a year and a half, 2 years ago. I just thought it needed a proper video on it. You know, it's a very interesting legion to me. I knew nothing about them until about 2 or 3 years ago. I was playing Call to Arms Gates of Front, and I saw the Blue Division units, and I thought, who the hell are these guys? And then I went down the rabbit hole of Spain's involvement in World War II. And I've got to say, it is my favourite unit out of all sides of World War II. They're very interesting, very cool uniforms, lots of legendary battles, and shows true Spanish fighting spirit. Anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you on the next one. You guys take it easy.